book that I'm actually going to be talking about. Bad Dostoevsky. Sorry, I just saw something that made me laugh. That is hilarious. Okay. Inside joke. This review, I'm jumping right in because I want to get some lunch quickly. A Gorgeous Excitement by Cynthia Weiner. I believe it's Weiner. A Gorgeous Excitement. So this is a debut novel that was sent to me by Crown Publishing, which I believe is owned by Penguin. It's a Penguin. There's a particular word for it, and it just evaded me. Where you have all these publishers that fall under the big ones, but imprint. It's imprint of Penguin, but Crown Publishing, and I got this sent to me. This past, it came in the mail actually in November. And I had hoped to have it read and reviewed, at least on Instagram, by its publication date, which was January 21st. My reading slowed down. I was reading it in January. I just didn't finish it until February. So, or maybe even early March, but I finished it in February. I'm looking at my review. Finally getting around to doing the video review for it now. Now, in this particular review, you will see that I am not using any quotes because, again, I'm reading, I read off of a proof. So you are to not quote proofs because there are some, again, tweaks that may still have been made before to the manuscript before it was officially published. So there may be some things in here that got tweaked or edited or typos fixed or whatever. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have a juicy review. It's still going to be juicy. Let's dive in because this is, of course, a contemporary release that I got on with, which is rare. So this is the author's debut novel, and it does pull from a true murder that occurred in Manhattan in the 1980s called the Preppy Murder. And the body of a young woman was found in Central Park, and it's this dialogue that occurred around this murder and how the victim and the culprit were portrayed in the media, in the newspapers, on the news. And Weiner is really kind of highlighting how Weiner was. And so you have the author here having this discussion about women in this particular time period. I'm pretty sure if you wanted to, you could read this over into the 21st century if you agree or disagree. But what's interesting is the author herself was coming of age during this time in New York City. So she is a New York native. She is a New York City native, born and bred from a Jewish household. And she is writing about this time period in which she was also coming of age. And she highlights the freedom that Nina, our main character, and her peers had. They were out there partying, doing drugs. There was some sexual freedom here. Again, freedom in quotation marks. But this lifestyle did have its own consequences, it had its own consequences. And so she's shedding light on this. She's not sugarcoating it. She was like, we were out, there weren't many constraints from our parents. We were just out here pretty much doing whatever we wanted to do. And, she also knew the real culprit. She was acquainted with him. She had drinks with this man, who the real preppy murderer. She knew this man. So, A Gorgeous Excitement, of course, we have our main character, Nina, a young Jewish girl, 18 years of age. It's the summer, and she is going away to university soon in the fall. Her home life is a bit dysfunctional. Her mother is mentally unstable. She's hopelessly in love with a guy named Gardner, who everybody loves, right? All the women love him. All the young women love him because he's, I guess, got that teenage appeal for this demographic. But he's frustratingly cryptic, as most crushes are at that age. She has a situationship. Let's call it a situationship. She's also obsessed with losing her virginity before going to college because she feels behind some of her other female friends, in particular and peers. Some of these women are not friends, but they're frenemies. But she feels behind those who have had more experience than her experience in quotation marks. This is a setting that is rife with alcohol and drugs at a young age. Nina is exposed to and consumes some stuff. We're just going to say that. And with very little to no interference. She, and the title of this book, A Gorgeous Excitement, is referencing a Sigmund Freud quote on cocaine. So she does come in contact with, she does become acquainted rather with cocaine. I do tend to be somewhat wary of narratives that heavily use alcohol and drugs in the narrative because it can be fatiguing. But in this narrative, it does work because, again, the author is highlighting an environment that she grew up with. She's like, this is what we had, whatever we wanted, we could get it. And so they didn't have many constraints. But I don't feel like she's glorifying it. It is what it is. She is just putting the reality out there of what it was like. And so there is this undercurrent in this novel, though. There's a tone here that something is off. There's an edge to this fun. Again, we know that there's a murder that's going to be happening. We know there's a murder that is going to take place in this narrative. The author isn't sugarcoating. It is what it is. And it does serve the narrative because even with all of this alcohol use and drug use, we see Nina start to realize some things where maybe some of her peers don't. And the consequences of those are that you can assume about how decisions were made, right? One character maybe choosing to continue certain types of drug use, Nina choosing not to, and she lets you draw conclusions from that. Again, there's an obvious theme here about violence against women, especially in this particular setting, how it was portrayed by the media and how people and entities can shape narratives. So you see Nina goes through this, focuses in on how the newspapers and the media, the news outlets are skewing this murder, blaming the victim, saying she was asking for it in a sense, portraying the culprit in a certain way. And yet you have this young woman who was murdered and not able to defend herself. Nina herself experiences some derogatory remarks and unsolicited advances in this narrative, and she handles it the best way that she knows how. There is an interesting parallel here in this narrative, how Nina takes note of these headlines and how they're skewed and kind of unfair. Not kind of, they're unfair. There's another incident that's highlighted in this novel about something that happened to a model, and yet she does have her own biases. There it is. She chooses to perceive other people based on her own bias, just as we all do. She chooses to look at Gardner a certain way. She chooses to look at this hair. Oh my gosh. She chooses to view her mother under a certain lens. She chooses to view some of her friends or acquaintances under a certain lens because she loves or cares for them or doesn't like them, whatever the case may be. And that does cloud her own judgment in some ways, as it does with all of us. We tend to want to see the best in people that we like. Even so, we're willing to see not necessarily what am I trying to say? We're willing to see the best in some people, but like overlook what we need to see because it's not suiting our own narrative or bias of how we've propped this person up in our own imagination or head. I'm not saying that necessarily some of those interpretations are not wrong, but they're not holistic to the individual. My favorite part of this story actually is the dynamic between Nina and her mother. It is strained. It's a challenging relationship because her mother is not well. Again, her mother is mentally not well. Her mother is heavily medicated. Her mother, you could probably say, suffers from depression. There's a lot of pressure put on Nina from her father to look after her mother. Nina also visits her grandfather who has Alzheimer's. And so Nina, even for an 18-year-old, actually has a lot to bear when it comes to these adults in her life. And Nina just longs for a present mother. And for a time, it seems that she gets that when her mother's medication is switched. and she switched over to different medication, and you get this fun, spontaneous, unreserved mother. And they go on these outings and stuff, but that's still not her mother, right? But Nina is willing to take what she can get because she just wants her mother present. But it's still obvious that even in this manic state where her mother is up here, that her mother is not well. And as you can anticipate, there is a crash that comes. If you are interested in exploring things of madness and narratives, you could put this into that category, even though it's not the main character. It's the main character observing her mother and witnessing and experiencing what's happening with her mother. Nina does refer to the bell jar quite a bit in this novel. She is a reader. And so Nina also acknowledges that she knows that her mother isn't well. She knows. She's in denial about some stuff, but she knows. Even when it seems like she's well, she's not well. Nina is reserved, and she feels like in some cases she has to be reserved because, again, she has these responsibilities placed on her when it comes to her mother and her grandfather, right? And so she looks enviously at people who are just unfettered. They are unreserved. They say what they want to say. They do what they want to do because Nina feels like she doesn't have that freedom. There is a point in the story, I feel like it's a bit of a spoiler, the setting of it, but she's looking at another very minor character. They pop up once. And she looks at this person and they say what they want to say. They're doing what they want to do. Even though their illness is controlling it, Nina's still in a sense envious. She's like, because I still have to be controlled for the sake of others. Even when her mother is really in a state of psychosis, Nina is almost like, I wish I could be unreserved. Anyway, I really liked this story. It is grungy. It's kind of raunchy at times. And again, for me, it's like raunchiness with a purpose, if that makes sense. And I just really enjoyed it. And I tend to struggle with contemporary releases, but Cynthia Weiner shows beautifully and doesn't tell. She lets the reader draw certain conclusions, and I really liked that. The way the story ended was very satisfying. I wanted to keep living in Nina's world. I wanted to see what she got up to in college, right? I feel like I wanted her, like it was reminding me of Celine in The Idiot. She kind of reminded me of that a bit, but I wanted to get her college days. Like, can we get more stories on Nina? I need to know. If you're a fan of The Idiot by Aleph Bodeman, I think you might like this story because you've got this quirky, fun, young woman who's still figuring things out. She's quite flawed in some ways. Again, she's figuring things out. She doesn't always have the best judgment. She gets involved with some of these characters. Like, she has this cryptic love interest and how that turns out. And this was a page turner for me when my reading has slowed down. I give it a 4 out of 5. I think this actually will be an excellent summer read, again, because it's taking place in the summer right before Nina goes away to college for the first time. So highly, highly, highly recommend if this book sounds like it's up your alley. New release. With that, I'm going to wrap up. Are you interested in this story? Have you heard of it? Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also feel free to follow me on Instagram where I get to more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my book content there first, and I like to post the occasional goofy reel or meme in the Instagram stories because we all need a good laugh, right? Okay. And with that, I will sign out. I'll see you in the next one.